All right. Welcome to an interview episode of Cannabis Last Week, brought to you by Global Cannabis Times. I'm your host, John Purow. Now, before we get to an awesome interview with Peter Su, I want to note that any opinions I express are my own and not those of my law firm. For example, if I was to say that I am much funnier than Peter Su, that would be my own opinion and not that of my law firm. And it probably wouldn't be true, but I'll try. No, I'm kidding. Now, and the other thing I like to do before we start is I want to give a quick prayer to the video chat gods. May our Wi-Fi connections be sturdy, our dogs and children quiet. And actually, I normally would say, and may Amazon Prime another time, but Peter and I are doing something a little bit different. We are recording late night, potentially with certain substances as, to help lubricate the conversation. Not that we need it for how well Peter and I know each other, but just, for shits and giggles, to see if we can maintain any type of composure and intelligence as we speak about these topics with our low tolerances. So without further ado, I will have the pleasure of introducing my friend, Peter Su, who is Senior Vice President at Green Check Verified. I also want to note that Peter is a writer for the Rolling Stone Culture Council, which just sounds really cool, and a military veteran. So I always want to say, especially since it's a public platform, thank you for your service, honestly. And yes, so Peter, welcome to the show. Very happy to have you here, sir. Maybe it makes sense to give a little bit about your bio because you're very established on the banking side in cannabis, and then we could start getting into some related topics.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for that intro. And I'm totally going to blow up your spot here. This is completely just for your employer. This was completely John's idea. It's 10 o'clock at night. He said, "Pete, come on my show. We're going to do it late. We'll have drinks." He literally
with or without cannabis in them, possibly. Right?
I apologize for that incident. So Peter Su, I was up until very recently a longtime banker, 25 years in banking, stops at HSBC, Signature Bank, Dime, and East West. And for the last several years of my life, I've been running cannabis banking programs, which I know sounds a little weird. And as you said, I'm currently with Green Check Verified. We can come back to that in a second, but let me see. I'm on the NCIA Banking Committee. I chair the New York City Cannabis Industry Association Banking Committee, as well as the Hudson Valley. I am, you don't know this, actually, I have just joined the Asian Cannabis Roundtable as treasurer. And as I'm
already on that. No. All right. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's great. I mean, you have all the extracurriculars if you were applying, for college, like my parents had me stack up. Right?
Yeah. I just need to do some I don't know, like Save the Children's kitchen soup, things like that. And I'm good.
No, it's just, it's remarkable. You are one of those people, right, that I think to myself, how does that guy do everything that he does? Is there some type of contraption, time manipulation device that gives him 28 hours a day that, he's able to accomplish all these things, which is to say, bravo, sir.
Now, John, when you say those people, what exactly do you mean by that?
Highly accomplished people, okay. highly accomplished people. The people essentially that I'm interviewing on this show. That's what I mean. That's the target, those people. Yeah.
But I'm sorry, I would be remiss if I don't continue my plug on my company.
Yes.
Green Check Verified is a software, a cannabis banking compliance software. So any bank that or an FI that has decided to get into cannabis banking might quickly find, wow, what a pain in the butt. There's just a lot of work that has to be done. Monitoring the transactions, licenses, due diligence, everything, right? And so in the early days, of course, people did it manually. That there were no other options. And so companies like us, popped up to really answer that fairly simple question was, how do you automate some of that processes? Because otherwise, again, your only option would be to hire more and more BSA analysts, meaning compliance officers. And whereas with our program, we have competitors. I want to say we're the best. We're certainly the largest. With software like that, you can manage a cannabis banking program with far less resources.
actually, so that made me think of something in terms of describing what it is that you guys do, right? Is that if you simplify things for the banks, right, by doing the verification, but by taking a larger and larger segment of the market, some of that verification essentially gets, you don't have to duplicate it, right? If you're talking about checking on licenses, right, by certain parties, you're going to know that in different transactions relating to different banks, but possibly, right? I mean, there are efficiencies that are created by soaking up as much of the market as you guys have been capable to do, or am I misunderstanding it?
No, totally. You're right. And in fact, the spoiler alert here is that we're thinking about how to grow beyond that, right? How can we take this, because we have a lot of data. How can we take that to the next level? And so that we are taking steps to move beyond just, perhaps just doing a checking account.
I think maybe you guys want to consider acquiring an artificial intelligence named Ultron, but using him for good instead of what he does in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. No, I'm sorry.
You just went full nerd on us.
It's just like I try to keep the lid down, but it just keeps on popping off. There are going to be Marvel references. What can I say? So you are investigating some of these other, ways that you said in terms of branching out a bit.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Branching out, making that comment to a banker, but you're out of that banking thing. So,
that
humor doesn't play with you
anymore.
Yeah,
it kind of feels weird to say I'm not a banker anymore. Although technically, I'm still essentially doing the same job, right? Like instead of running one cannabis program, now I'm running 100. So
yes. But the customers now are the banks themselves, right? And the financial institutions and the people who need that type of verification.
That's right.
In relation to any of these financial transactions. So I think now would be a good time to just confess that this has all been subterfuge. I just got you on here. How did you get 8,800 LinkedIn followers? Okay. Like, how did you do that? How do I shear off some of them? Actually, no, this interview is all a ruse. No, I'm kidding. I'm just messing around. It's by being kind of a big deal, as Will Ferrell would say, with your different positions. How do you like the NCIA, by the way? It's it's an industry leader, and they have the different committees and banking. I think I actually met one of your colleagues from it recently on a call. But I'm curious to know in terms of, these things that you do on these committees to help move things forward. How does the NCIA, play a role in terms of expanding things federally? And the banking, what are you guys trying to do there? Is there any way towards not like legislators or something? I'm curious to know what the banking committee focuses on. I expressed that terribly.
Well, actually, you just said it. That was exactly right. So the NCIA is fundamentally an advocacy group, right? So. Yep. Advocating for the industry, for the cannabis industry, obviously, the banking committee, of course, then is focused around helping solve some of the banking challenges that the cannabis industry has. Which, in case you haven't heard, it has some banking challenges.
Yes, unless you are the term I coined right before we started recording to describe noobs to the industry. Unless you're a doob noob, you're probably pretty familiar, if you're in the industry, about the issues that federal legality causes in terms of normal banking. And the silver bullet that we've all been counting on now for a couple of years, the Safe Banking Act, that has not been able to get passed to do. I mean, I guess I could, for some people, do my Ace Ventura style recap of the Safe Banking Act, right? The Safe Banking Act would make it easier and clear up certain impositions for banks, so major financial institutions would be able to hop into the water of cannabis more easily. However, they've been able to get it passed by the Senate. Back in the days, it used to be the fact that it was Mitch McConnell who was blocking it. Now, however, with Democratic control, Chuck Schumer wanted to have a comprehensive legalization bill that he proposed, so he instead didn't want to do things incrementally and doesn't want to do safe banking. Cory Booker said he wouldn't do it without social equity involved, and so that's why it hasn't gone anywhere. They tried to shoehorn it into the National Defense Authorization Act, but it didn't work. Right? And
Dude, that was awesome. Did you really memorize that?
No, I just did it off the top of my head. That's what happens when you do the podcast on a weekly basis.
That scene. Do you remember that scene where Will Ferrell like blanks out and he blurs out this like debate? Remember that?
It was in Old School. right?
Old school, yeah.
Right. Yeah. At the end when they're trying to pass like the tester to stay on.
It was exactly like that. Like federal legalization has been on the docket for many, many years now. However, due to the modern pedagogy of
yeah, and he tried just like Thurgood Marshall arguing his case, right? I mean, it was just that was yes. So
here's the interesting thing, and maybe I have a slightly contrarian view on this, but I don't necessarily think that the safe banking is the panacea that it's like made out to be, right? For one thing, the truth of the matter is that banking is available, right?
Yes.
Like if you look around, the industry is banked. That's the honest truth.
But
now
the fees,
right? Now it is underbanked, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. A reporter from Financial Times called me, and we were chatting about that, and he had that exact view. And he was the one that kind of pointed out. He's like, every other industry is kind of overbanked. It's saturated. There's a lot of banks kind of competing for the business, and cannabis does not. And we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry now, right? And it does not necessarily have sort of saturation.
Yeah.
In fact, in most states, there might only be a handful of financial institutions that are willing. So everyone is going to those, whatever the number is, 3, 4, 10. Now, FinCEN estimates that there are 700 FIs in the country.
Yeah.
That are willingly banking cannabis. Now, I think most people in the industry believes that that's too high of a number because they base it on SARS.
Okay. Those are the reporting disclosures you need to make.
That's right. Yeah. Suspicious activity reports. Yeah. So marijuana limited SARS. But let's just say that's true. 700. Well, there's over 10,000 FIs in America. So less than 10% are banking are available to bank in the industry. And again, that's over the course of the entire nation, right? So like if you look at one particular state, California, let's say. Yeah. And I realize there's no specific data on this, but let's just say there's less than like 20, for that entire state,
Yeah, exactly. They're not evenly distributed. They're distributed more likely in the states that have adult use programs. So actually it reminds me of something that I want to mention to you, right? But so that's funny because I never thought about or seen statistics about what percentage of the financial institutions in the US are servicing the industry. So less than 10%. And I do recall seeing an article at some point that actually said the number of financial institutions that service the cannabis industry dipped a little bit in 2021, which was shocking to me considering how well the industry fared during the pandemic. So that was a little bit, odd to me. Yeah. But actually, let me just go straight to it, right? I think that if I recall correctly, this same story caught your attention on LinkedIn and you posted it, and I flagged it as one of my golden nug stories, and it circled back. The curious case of the cannabis cash carrying armored car confiscated by cops, right? Yes. So to recap the scenario, because it just came back up again, right? This is the type of kerfuffle that's created by the federal legality and people trying to bank. It was a armored car company, I think out of California. And there was a dispensary in the medical market in Missouri that couldn't get banking in Missouri. And so they were banking with a bank in Colorado. So armored car drives from California to Missouri. All right. En route, they're in Kansas. They get pulled over by cops, right? Yeah. Who apparently have been tipped off by feds. And they say, oh, where are you going? Oh, we're going to Missouri to pick up some cannabis cash. And they get the cash. And when they come back through Kansas, they get pinched on the way to Colorado with that money, and that money gets confiscated. And
is that a lawyer term, pinched? Is that a lawyer term?
Yes, that's an official legal term, actually. Yeah. Or is it? So that came up now because actually that company sued everybody because this was the 5th time that it happened to them and 3 times recently. So, Exhibit Z, right, in terms of the impositions caused by the federal illegality, and it's just, what do people point towards in terms of a need for banking? It creates an unsafe industry.
Definitely does. Yeah.
There was the bud tender, I believe, was in Washington, who died, who got shot in one of these robberies, and now they're actually, I was like armed shootouts in California. And I mean, I think one thing that's interesting to kind of discuss is about, the battle against the illicit market, right? What are we trying to accomplish in this industry? We're trying to build something legitimate where taxes are paid and the taxes go towards good uses. We're trying to create social equity, owned businesses. And we're trying, and in order to do so, you have to combat the illicit market, or else people are going to stay where they've always been getting their weed. And banking ties into that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, first of all, that cash carrier situation, I think that's a tough one, because the truth is that I think there's definitely fault on the part of the courier. I was actually shocked to hear that they were driving across state lines. I had always thought that, everyone was taking care to ensure that everything would stay within the state, just like the businesses, right? Everything's got to stay in the state. I felt like that's been the norm right now. In some situations, you do have aggregators with, vaults and smart safes and things like that. And that's a different sort of scenario. But to directly pick it up from a store, let's say, drive across the state line, drive across another state line, and then say, well, we're going to deposit at a bank in Colorado, not great practice.
I agree, right?
Yeah.
When you read the story, you're like, seems a little bit risky with all of your cash, especially when you're talking about driving through a state, Kansas, that has zero program. Right. This isn't, they don't even have medical right now. Though there's potentially some movement on that this year. Right. They have nothing. So agreed, it's risky, right? When we know that, yes, exactly. The way you put in your mind is nothing crosses state lines. So it's risky, but it's also, when something like that happens, you're saying, is this something speaking to something larger from the federal government in some capacity? Are these lone wolf agencies that are doing this? Is this them, essentially making their mark in the sand? Like, we're not coming in state, like you said, but if you're crossing state lines, then that's where we draw the line. I don't know, but it was certainly an interesting, relatively kind of unique story, I feel like, in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely pushes the limits of like what we think of as the Cole Memorandum sort of initiative, right? Hey, as long as it's state legal, hands off, right? Now, in this situation, it's somewhat gray, right? Yeah, by the sound of it, these are perfectly legit state legal licensed businesses, right? Everyone is legalized, but they did cross state lines. And again, into a state where there is no program. So I'm not sure that's firmly in the gray, in my opinion.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, like, I remember learning, in law school, they're talking about it's the one thing to have a law, it's another thing to enforce it. And so I think that, some of the, justification they said in I feel like they put it even in the Cole Memorandum itself was, we have better things to do. We only have so many agents, right? We're not going to go out there and bust into your states that you voters have voted for it to be legal and start, arresting everyone. And so, but like we said, maybe we've identified and talked about the fact that there was something specifically unique in terms of the crossing state lines, and that's why they stepped in. But it was certainly.
But I agree with you. When I saw that story pop up, I was like, wow! So they've done it. They have seized cash from a legal state licensed business. They've done it. So that's it. We've crossed the Rubicon, right? Now, yes, there's some details, there's some devils in those details there, but that's it. We're testing it. We are testing that priority,
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, tying it back to the whole banking thing is that the fact of the matter is that Missouri business could not find banking that was feasible or accessible in his own state. And so they were desperate. They didn't want to be sitting on a ton of cash and making themselves, putting a target on their back. And so they probably paid a pretty penny also to the armored car company to get from Missouri to Colorado. And then they paid a whole lot more they didn't intend to, unfortunately, when it was all seized. But, now they're litigating. So,
you bring up a great point there, and it's not talked about enough, maybe because, this banking, But so to me, so I made up this like the 3 C's of cannabis banking, right? Capability, capacity, and costs. So it's not a lack.
Sorry.
So it's not a lack of banking, right? It's a deficiency in capability, capacity, and cost, right?
Yep.
So what do I mean by that? Well, some of it you just brought up, right? I mean, look, cannabis is a tough business, right? Margins are thin. 280E is a problem. And, if you're talking about a small business, mom and pop business, paying hundreds, thousands of dollars a month in banking. And if they have to pay for armor trucks, if they have to pay for smart safe, that's real money. That's real money that adds up, that eats into your margin. Now compare that to your competitor in the black market, right?
Exactly. Right.
And you were talking about my LinkedIn post. If you saw recently, I posted, I just made a really simple comment. I said, listen, there's a difference between legalization and decriminalization, right? Mm-hmm. And we're seeing it, I don't know if you've been in Manhattan recently, we're seeing it firsthand, right?
Yeah. Some of my clients have been, talking about these places that are popping up. The Empire Club, I think, is one they're talking about. Mm-hmm. And they're, saying, I think that they're going as a nonprofit, and they're trying to get around based on you're buying membership to a nonprofit, and you just happen to get handed marijuana. So I don't know what their play is necessarily. Are they trying to make their buck, before someone cracks down on them, or are they actually going to try and turn those around into license applicants? Stay tuned.
So I think it's twofold, right? One, they see that there is no enforcement, right?
Yeah.
That there isn't, right? So hey, why not? There's a van that drives around Manhattan selling weed. It's literally a van driving around Manhattan.
I know that. I've never. Look, I just think that those are tourist traps, and I think they take advantage of the fact that hemp looks like weed and smells like weed. But, you don't find out that it doesn't have THC until after you've walked away from the van. They're tourist traps, right? I guarantee you those things don't have a lot of repeat loyal customers.
That's a good point.
Right? I mean, that's kind of what I think. I've never actively went up to them, engaged them in a conversation to try and learn, because it just comes off so, scammy to me, and hopefully I'm not cutting off a future client or something. But I almost feel like I would get worked up being like, you're not helping the cause here, right? Necessarily. But wait, I was thinking, you touched upon something interesting, but now the hard cider might not be cooperating. So combating. So, I mean, here's the interesting thing that you also touched upon, right? Is that, well, one thing I want to say is I think sometimes people mush together issues and think that the Safe Banking Act is going to affect 280E, right? It will not, right? It is not correct. Like, my understanding is that it is not going to change IRS regulations. That is not built into safe banking as is currently done, right? So I think that I've encountered multiple people who have that misconception. But I think you touched upon something else that's interesting, is that, and this is when I talk to people who are, contemplating hopping into New Jersey and New York as they take off, safe banking will pass in some capacity, right? Mm-hmm. It's hard to tell whether or not that'll happen incrementally or as part of a full-scale bill. I think if Republicans are in control, it's obviously a lot more likely that it will pass incrementally, because they're not going to, the social equity issue is, going to impact that side as much. But the thing that I think that's interesting, and you're talking about the limited banks that are in it, and they have, I guess, more appetite for risk, and that's reflected in the fees that they charge. People in the industry now, at some points in the future, are going to have shots in the arm in terms of profitability, because if banking opens up, banking fees go down. If the stigma is removed with respect to certain service providers, including insurance, right? Because there is an equivalent kind of insurance bill that they've been trying to get through that has not gone through. Those prices could go down, and 280E at some point that will get removed, and boom, then you could, you don't have to be clever and do, research tax credit or certain things, I mean, having a good accountant is important, but all of a sudden you're going to be able to deduct normal business expenses. So people who are getting in now, there are things down the road where as things open up and these things get passed, there will be more profitability if you can survive the hyper competitive time now in whatever state you're in with how many licenses they're handing out, right?
Yeah. You know, it's funny you say that. I hope I'm not throwing out some conspiracy theory here, but I'm of the belief
we peddle in those. No, I want listeners. Give me conspiracy, Peter.
I'm of the belief that the reason why we haven't seen more movement on, you know, the lobbying front is that there's no money in lobbying for change at the moment. And so what I mean by that is if you're in the game, you're in the game. Yeah. And you're kind of happy the way things are, right? Because it's a hard game right now. Only certain types of players are going to be able to or can do what's happening right now. The MSOs, the multi-state structures, right? So we're really seeing the situation where there's the haves and have-nots, and the gap is really widening. And if anything, if you think about it, the game is set up such that, you know, only the well-capitalized can survive, you know?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting in the sense that the existing MSOs may want it to stay exactly the way that it is, because when the floodgates really open up, bigger money is coming in.
Bigger money is coming in. Yes.
I mean, look, they might like it because that's when they'll exit. They'll get acquired by, you know, perhaps the biggest alcohol or tobacco companies there are in the world. Though, you know, Schumer's bill essentially says that they're trying to avoid that. You know, but it's but here's the thing I'll say about this is that it's very interesting that you talked about like lobbying and who wants to change the status quo, because I actually think that a really good example happened to be specifically today. And so, you know,
Amazon.
I'll admit, right. Because, so I got a note, right. You know, this will air in post after, you know, the day that we're talking about this, you know, that we're recording, which is January 26th. And the big news, you know, this week is that Amazon has announced that it is endorsing Representative Nancy Mace, the Republicans from South Carolina, her Koch brother. I did a podcast recently, Peter, I have to confess, I talked about the Koch brothers supporting Nancy Mace's bill, forgetting that one of them had died. So the lone Koch brother left over of the, you know, Koch brothers who fund many libertarian and Republican causes, their, you know, bill with Nancy Mace, Amazon has endorsed it. So that's a player that, you know, would stand.
I've heard of them. I've heard of them.
Right. You know, they're the ones doing all the deliveries of your weed. Though Amazon doesn't deliver liquor anywhere, does it?
No, but I guess I can see. I see the play. I understand what's going on there. But you know, so I read this interesting like statistic recently that you know, it was like it broke down like the largest market cap of a particular company in each like segment. It was like, you know, the largest pharma was like $430 billion. The largest, you know, beverage, $230 billion, you know, something like that. Largest cannabis company today by market cap, $7 billion. And so that's what I mean when I said before that it's a certain type of player. Sure, money, but not Amazon
scale.
Right. Yeah. And so, like the longer you can hold back the floodgates from true institutional money, the longer like these types of embedded players, you know, have the inside track. But everything, right? Everything gets, even banking, let's say, you know, that they because they're bringing bigger balances, they're probably getting charged less, you know. Economy of scale, everything, right? Now look, I let's not be naive. That's true in every industry, right? That there's the big players, and then, you know, how many mom and pop shops do you see around anymore? But the point is that you're seeing it like in action, like this is in real time. You're seeing it in cannabis, you know. Yeah,
you're seeing MSOs, you know, go in and follow the model and buy the medical license holders before adult use. You know, get in by the medical license holders, lobby for adult use. You know, get grandfathered over. But there's at the same time, obviously, that there is a ton of consolidation from those big players, and then the regional MSOs who are trying to, grow into that. We have states like New Jersey, New York coming on, trying to have micro businesses, right?
Yeah.
And really, value social equity and stuff, and put in things like, oh, if you have this type of social equity license, you can't transfer it for 3 years. And you love the intentions. They are very, very noble. They could potentially play out horribly. Right. I mean, but look, look at the other side of the coin, right? There was a lottery, I think it was Arizona, for social equity licenses, that there were 200, it was an insane percentage of applicants. It was something like, this is killing me, I can't remember off the top of my head. If we had only recorded this during the day, I would have been like, beep, 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 beep.
Whose idea was this to drink?
I know, whose idea was this? What has 2 thumbs and they came up with this idea? That guy. No, it was something like 1,000 applicants for like 10 licenses, because they were vertical, they were social equity, and they had 0 restrictions. So the people who won them turned around, they just got a golden ticket, and would sell them for 10 million a pop. So it's going to be really interesting. Will these well-intentioned laws actually result in lasting mom and pop shop style, microbrewery style, cannabis stores?
I think so. I agree, right? Like it. Of course, the intention is to do right. Of course, the intention is to, hey, let's promote a certain type of industry, But sometimes the opinions are, a perfect example on the NCIA committee chair meetings. As the banking committee, I lauded New York's $200 million, social equity fund. I said, wow, New York's I don't know if you guys saw the news, but we're doing this, and this woman from the social equity chair, a noted, activist, person that believes in the social equity fight. She was like, she's like, Pete, I'm sorry. Because she went right after me. She's like, actually, I really hated that bill. And I was like, wow. I was like, I think it's fabulous. I think they really put a lot of thought. I'll be honest, it was one of the few times in my life I was impressed with my local government. And I thought, wow, you guys really put some thought into this, because of DASNY, because of Ruben McDaniel, like the people involved and their ability to actually deliver on what they're saying they're going to do. Now, mind you, this is conceptual, right? Like they just talked about it, hasn't been rolled out yet. So sure, it could fall on its face, and then I could be wrong. But my point is, I looked at that and I thought, bravo. And she looked at it and said, no. Like not just no, it was kind of like a hell no.
It's just so tough. It's like it is such an important nut to crack in terms of, you can't right the wrongs of the past, right? But you could try and build things, fairly now. And I don't know of any state that I could think of that's really solved it yet. I'm actually going to have an upcoming guest. I guess it'll air after yours. I have Tahir Johnson from United States Cannabis Council coming on. And I want to talk out some of these, issues with him, because I find it really, really interesting. And they had that very interesting event where they had minority business owners talking about how the lack of safe banking affected them, right? And how everyone thinks that, if safe banking passes, then it, favors the MSOs. No, it affects everyone, and small businesses, right, getting charged high banking fees, like we talked about, makes it difficult for them to stay in business. But it's funny. So we're talking about Amazon, right? So I'm just curious, right? You know this industry very, very well. You probably are an Amazon Prime, subscriber, so you know Amazon decently well too. Do we think that the play is that they want to be delivering weed to everyone around the country? Is that what we think their play is?
Keep in mind, I have no insight, right? Like I'm just reading. I'm just curious.
Just seeing, play smoker damus, toker damus, whatever I call it that week, right? Is that the
but
play?
Logically, they're assuming that there is that there's a segment of the market that is okay with, like, okay, I'm going to bulk order, X amount of weed that can come delivered to my house. And I don't mind waiting, 2 days a day for it. And it doesn't have to be, I don't want to go to the store, things like that. So yeah, I think that's exactly what they're thinking. It's light, it's packable.
Wonder. I mean, well, look, Uber's CEO has straight out said when it is federally legal, it's going to be Uber Eats and Uber Smokes. I don't know what they've said it, right? I think
in Canada they do. In Canada they delivered.
They did. They rolled out the first program. I covered in the podcast, but it was. I don't think that they actually were delivering it. I think that they were taking orders for pickup on the Uber Eats app. So it was not, but it was the first test program of any variety that was Uber cannabis ordering. So I was like, I definitely made that the golden nug of that story of the week, I think, for the podcast. No.
You know what I love? How many times have you heard someone say, referencing their cannabis company, where they say, we're going to be the Amazon of cannabis?
Yeah. Yep.
So many times.
Or the Apple of cannabis, right? Our dispensary is going to look like an Apple store. One.
John, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
What's the deal with the superlatives in cannabis? Why is cannabis industry so braggadocio?
I think that because it's so new and it's so competitive and it's all about differentiation that people.
Because how many biggest,
overcompensate,
large,
right? Well, the other thing is that it's not. The other thing is that it's not. There are the analytics companies out there and stuff, but I feel like there's a lot less clear-cut visible information, and so it's easier for people to just make
I'm the largest
certain claims like that. It's overcompensation, I think, right? In a very new competitive marketplace, and trying to catch attention and being limited in the ways that you can market. You're not going to be on certain billboards on certain highways. I was reading this year is the year of direct email marketing, but there are restrictions. So everyone's trying to rise to the top and possibly get purchased, or
everybody's at the top, apparently.
Everyone's just trying to get higher in this industry. Pun always intended. And so I think that leads to that a decent amount in this, I would say. I'm trying to think if there were other things to cover. I had made a note about, talking about other difficulties in terms of banking, right? There was a story recently about Visa, Visa and MasterCard, cannabis transactions, no bueno, right?
No
and
bueno.
So some people were trying to get around this by doing this cashless ATM model, where you go to an ATM, you say you're buying something for $56. They ring it up at 60 as an even increment of 20 and make it a withdrawal on an ATM card. And Visa caught onto this and said, no, right? But it's the thing I do love about this industry, and I think that you appreciate, is I dig the chill vibe and everything, but it's a lot of very, very smart, creative people, right? There's a lot of problem solving with superlatives. Right? Because to be a troublemaker, you have to think you have to be the most clever problem solver. But,
I've solved the most number of problems in cannabis industry.
Yeah, right. So I there are these clever solutions, these thoughts about loopholes. We see all the time, like being lawyers, like talking about some things where, the minor cannabinoid thing, Peter, right? There's the other thing. It's like, it comes from hemp. It's legal. What? No, we went through five different we went through 5 different conversion processes. We put it down to nothing, so it didn't exist. Brought it back up. I think that there are arguments certainly for certain things, but it kind of strains credulity at some point when it's when it's going to some of these lengths of all of these chemical conversion processes where there's nothing essentially of the original in a fashion. But can you blame people when they're in a highly competitive industry and the value of CBD tanks right? And they're fully invested in it and they're looking for something. And, an opportunity comes along like Delta 8, which is
no problem.
Fantastic substance. Yeah. So,
well, what's a creative one that I you've heard of the gifting with the credit card?
Yeah. Yeah.
So for your audience that isn't familiar with this,
for the doob noobs,
for the doob noobs, I'm sorry, I used the wrong term.
You gotta use our terminology on the pod.
So as you know, no credit cards in cannabis. Well, so what if you order $200 worth of goods and it came with a hat, but they charge you $200 in your credit card for the hat, right? Now, here's the interesting thing, right? Versus the ease case where there was just outright like they were mislabeling sick code and stuff like that, right? Yeah. Here, they're telling the truth, right? There is a hat, and you were charged for it.
So for example, like the New York regulators,
they specifically called that out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they'll call it out, right? Anything that, connotes a financial transaction of any side, right? Where this good is exchanged that is not licensed market yet. Yeah. But it's interesting, right? Because you have this interim period, you'll have these states that are now passing it legislatively a lot of times. You have the decriminalization and, going into effect instantly, but then you have the time that, the lead time you need before the legal market starts up. Yeah. And during that period, right, enterprising fellows like gifters or the Empire Club, sprout up. And that's what made Virginia the most interesting, because they were all over the place, right? So they passed it legislatively when it was all Dem control. And from the beginning, they said, oh, wait, we're not going to have the adult use sales start until 2024. We're going to have this huge ramp up period. And then people were saying, what about social equity? What? So like, we're not going to expunge people during all this time, like all this inequitable shit's going to continue. And then they pivoted and they pushed that up. Right. And so all the decriminalization expungement kicks in 2021, and then you have a 3-year gap. Right. Yeah. And what's going to exist during that 3 years? Right. A legal market. Right? Listen, market's going to be like, booyah. Right. Yeah. You can't impose any serious, penalties on us because you decriminalized it. And you're going to have 3 years for an illicit market to really get even more established there. And then the wrinkle, Republicans win, who are not into this. So Virginia is fascinating how that's going to play out, because it's completely unique with that set of circumstances. And I'm dying to see what happens there, because, we're talking about, combating the illicit market in order to bring stuff over. I love all these things that I'm reading about, like amnesty programs. Have you heard about these? It's of course,
every state's got something different, I guess.
But get the illicit guys to just come directly over, cut a check, you'll get immunity, come in from the cold, and we'll collect taxes from you. That's great because you're directly taking out of the illicit market. But it just clicked in my head for the first time that Virginia is actually enabling an illicit market by decriminalizing so far in advance of when the actual legal sales are going to start. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I was about to say, here's something that I've never really heard covered too much. And I was going to announce it. I was going to throw it out here on your show.
Conspiracies and new news.
No. This is more like a problem that I haven't really heard addressed too much, but it's really a problem, which is, again, this idea of the social equity, the focus on social equity. So let's say here in New York State. So most social equity programs, of course, are predicated around the license. Mm-hmm. In other words, expungement, you get licensed, charges are expunged. But if you think about it, your typical group that is aspiring to a license, that process starts today, right? Well in advance of licensing, right? So you and I put our money together, we create an LLC, we're going to go buy, we're going to draw investor funds or whatever.
Can we please? No,
let's do it.
Let's do it. Like, let's launch the business just from this conversation. Sorry to interrupt.
But think about this, right? Let's say I have a criminal record, and I want to go open an account. I might have trouble opening that account, right? So what do I got to do?
That's interesting. You're saying the opening like the banking accounts and
just the bank account.
Just the bank account.
Yeah. Now let's say we tell the truth. All right, me and you, the John and Peter LLC is going to apply for a license. When they become available. Now, mind you, that's 18 months from now, right? But still, we need to start that groundwork today. Mm-hmm. Well, if we walk into any bank and say, yeah, we want to open an account, we intend to apply for a license. Most big money center banks will not open that account. If we're going to say, even though technically we're a quote unquote normal business right now, that there's no license, it's not even available to be applied for, right? All our transactions are going to be non-cannabis, right? We're going to be paying, Zuber and Lawler, right? We're going to be paying a lobbyist, things like that. So why do banks have a problem with pre-licensing? And then take that a step further. If we're social equity and we're pre-licensed, and I've got a criminal record or something like that, right? Like I'm not going to be expunged till I get the license, but I need that account today.
Yeah, no, frankly, what I think you just gave is a pitch for hiring good service providers like lawyers early in the process, right? No, but because I'm serious, right? These people are looking to enter into this industry. A lot of people just, want to open up a bank account or whatever. Yeah. And they go into the closest bank, the bank where they've done all their banking so many years. And maybe they're like, I'm not going to say what I'm doing this for. I'm just opening a bank account. And then
that's the problem.
They
Everybody
go
lies.
down
That's
that
the
road.
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of people in a lot of these early states or still now get all of their accounts closed, right? Yes. Including their personal accounts. When that bank, catches a sniff of the fact that they're engaging in exactly.
A whiff.
Puns always intended. That should just be the slogan of the show. Right? Cannabis last week, puns always intended. Right? That's what ends up happening. If you don't know the banks from the beginning that will service this when you do have a license, so they won't have a problem opening the account for you in the first place. But that's interesting. What you said also is that the being arrested for possession of marijuana is like it's a bonus in certain states like New Jersey and New York, right? Because it bumps you to the top of the line, gets you extra, special consideration. But at the same time, that's not something that most other systems like the bank are going to be like, yay, bonus points for you.
In fact, in a fairly literal sense, it's in the FinCEN guidelines. Like,
oh, really? It's like straight up there. Like, oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't say criminal record per se, but like that's one of the things that you would do, right? You would run a background check.
Yep. Yeah. No, makes sense. What do you say, bud? Should we wrap this up? Any other points you want to cover before we hop off? Any things of note or interest?
No, I'm good. I'm good. That was good. That we did good.